Good evening. Let me welcome you to our 5th webinar organized by the Department of English, Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh. We know that this is a part of a series of webinars, online symposium, etc. that our department has been organizing for more than a month. But today it is our privilege to have among us Professor Dr. Anisur Rahman, formerly Professor of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, and presently Senior Advisor at Recta Foundation. Professor Anisur Rahman, welcome to this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I regret that the chair of our department, Dr. Laizu Nasrin, will soon be available. She has been sick for some time, so she will soon join us. Before we start the session that Professor Rahman is bringing before us, that is about translation and about his experience with translation, let me take the opportunity to introduce Professor Anisur Rahman before the ones who might not be familiar with him. So I would like to use a PowerPoint for this session. I think the PowerPoint is pretty visible.
Yes, it's visible, sir.
Thank you. Yes, so let me take the privilege to introduce Professor Anisur Rahman. Professor Anisur Rahman is a poet, translator, and a literary critic. Formerly a professor of English at Jamia Millia Islamia, a central university in New Delhi, he is currently senior advisor at Recta Foundation, the world's largest website on Urdu language, literature, and culture. He has worked and published in the areas of comparative literature, translation, Urdu, and post-colonial studies, with special reference to the literatures of South Asia, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. He has to his credit 4 books authored by him, 6 edited or co-edited volumes, and 2 collections of Urdu poetry in English translations. His most recent publications include Ardenware, 60 poems, in translation, Positions and Paradigms, Hazaro Khwahish-e-Aisi, The Wonderful World of Urdu Ghazals, and Social Literary Cultures in South Asia. His collection of Urdu poetry in English translation, entitled A Garden of All Senses, 5 Centuries of Best Urdu Poetry, is due for publication in late 2021. Professor Rahman has also been an academic administrator. He has served as head, Department of English, Dean, Students' Welfare, Director, Center for Coaching and Career Planning, and Registrar, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He has been a Shastri Fellow at the University of Alberta, Canada, and a visiting scholar at Urdu University, USA. So today it is our pleasure and privilege to welcome and invite Professor Anisur Rahman to make a presentation on translating poetry, my search for a methodology. Anisur Rahman, the floor is yours.
First of all, thanks a lot, Professor Masroor Shahid Hussain, for your very kind words. In any webinar or any kind of event where you are going to speak, the most embarrassing moment is one when you are going to be introduced to the audience. These were very kind words, I must say that. And you have made my task a little more difficult than I have thought, because after such expectations, what forgiveness. I hope you can hear Elliot behind. After such knowledge, what forgiveness. So after such a wonderful introduction, what expectations do you have from a speaker? And I don't know if I'm able to fulfill that. But I must begin with a word of gratitude, as also words of thanks to the university, Jahangirnagar University, to the Department of English, to the head of the department, Professor Nasreen, to you, Professor Masroor Shahid Hussain. I'm also very thankful, grateful to the faculty members and to the students and to those who have joined today. And I consider myself to be very fortunate in the sense that we have been talking about these issues for quite some time. And we have shared platforms on several occasions, and I'm sure there are people here with whom I have interacted earlier as well. So that gives me kind of a confidence to be able to address you this evening about a subject which has been of very dear to me for a very long time now, and this is what I have done in theory as also in practice. So it's my pleasure. So when Professor Mashur Shahid Hussain spoke to me some time ago about this talk, I agreed and I sent a set of each the proposal, some set of say the areas or the discourses that we could develop. So finally we settled down on this, and I'm happy that this is one of the areas which is being taught, which is being researched, and which is also being practiced. So naturally, this is an area in which we need to talk further and further, because translation in this Indian subcontinent, as you call it, has a different kind of a life. This is one of the things that I would like to propose. We are still in the process of exploring ourselves. We are in the process of exploring our texts also. We are in the process of learning, and we have to be more authentic, and our translation needs to be taken much more seriously. It was taken earlier. So there are quite a few challenges. I and many like me are those who have been trying to lay our hands upon texts, trying to find our way, grope through the darkness, and how to deal with and how to engage with a text, and how to find an author, and how to ultimately find your own self to be able to translate those texts. I refer to the Indian subcontinent importantly, very importantly, because in this subcontinent where we belong, you would see that all of us are, or at least bilinguals. We know English because of the colonial history that we have had. We speak our own local languages, then we know some dialects, and also some of us are trilingual, and some of us know more than three languages. So we are in a far better position to negotiate with languages than any other, the unicultural kind of a situation or a location. So we live in two cultures, we live and die in two languages, and more than two languages. We dream in one, we speak in another. And sometimes ago, a question was raised whether you write in a language also, do you dream in that particular language? So this was a question that was raised long about 4 or 5 decades ago. This was a question. In fact, more than 5 decades ago, this question was raised when Indian writing in English or the subcontinental writing in English was being taught about. So suppose if I spoke in Urdu or I spoke in Bangla, so one would answer and one would question whether I also dream being Bangla speaking or being an Urdu speaking. Do I also dream in the language in which I'm going to? So I'm going to translate or I'm going to write, which means that translation is very much there each and every moment of our interaction that we have with ourselves, with our colleagues, friends, family, market, wherever we go, or in the academic platform for us. So this business of translation is something which has engaged our attention in the Indian subcontinent more importantly than it has engaged elsewhere. So this is an advantage, a position of advantage in which we know more than two languages. Now, this evening, what I would like to engage with is this, that what it means to me to be able to speak two languages, and maybe sometimes more than two languages. Most of us who grow in this particular culture, and say, for example, we have known Arabic to the extent of reading the Quran, the holy book. One has known Persian also. For example, I knew Persian, studied Persian when I was a school student, and then after that I forgot. And many years later, when I did my MA, and I thought I should go back to Persian because I knew my Urdu pretty well, if I could say that I knew my Urdu well. So I thought I should learn Persian also because they are closely related. From Persian, it comes out. So I traveled from one language to another, or through languages, you could say. So for me, this was a very fortunate kind of a situation that I was in a position to think of myself as a bilingual or a trilingual, and all the time was trying to engage with what does it mean to me to be a bilingual speaker or a bilingual author or a bilingual writer or a bilingual poet. So this was something which has stayed with me as a major question through my career. Starting from the days when I was in the college, a BA graduation student, that is 1968, I passed out. So from that time onwards, I've been engaging with this whole idea. I will come back to this. This also brought me to the question, how do I conceive my texts? What is my text? Where does it lie? And how do you understand what is my text? And how do I engage with that text? Do I identify a particular text which is my text and which I can write and which comes out of my pen? which communicates with my readers, with my people, with the post, the cultural, the fellows in a cultural setup or a domain. So this was one question. So the question was, in two languages or two more than two languages, one was trying to conceive one's text and was trying to engage with the two texts together, comparing all the time and seeing whether one has been able to make sense either verbally or in the written form. So these were the questions which started engaging my attention when I started thinking of two languages or more than two languages in which I was trying to train myself right from the very beginning. Therefore, there was a need for me at the later stage to understand some kind of a methodology by which you could understand this whole process of engaging with a text and trying to transfer the text into another language, from mother language to other language, from other language to mother language. So then I came to some of my own translations and trying to engage with how I can probably express myself in a language which is not mine, and how I can bring forth that idea to an audience or to a reader who I would like to own for myself, and with whom I would like to develop a kind of a fraternity and a literary brotherhood or a sisterhood. So these were the questions which engaged my attention right from the beginning. I would like to speak a few, say, present a few ideas before you for your own, say, with which you can engage, or which we can at the end of the talk come back and develop a discourse maybe. So in the light of my own experiences, I would like to speak about the translations of poetry. And when I say that I would like to speak, or the title says My Search for a Methodology, what do I mean by this? This is very presumptuous to speak in the first person singular number I. But the title that I have chosen for this is this actually, that I want to share my experiences and my ideas of language and how languages interact, and languages of a particular family or a group or to a people with whom you can communicate or connect with. So this was a search for a methodology, which later I found that I was looking really for a methodology. I was in the quest of a methodology. But in the earlier years, I was not at all aware. I was just trying my hands as if in the darkness, trying to grope and find something and to be able to connect and to speak and to write. So I'm constrained to speak here in the first person singular number because I'm going to speak of my own experience and trying to relate with you. Now, I, for example, speak, apart from English, I speak Urdu. You speak Bangla. Some of us speak French and other languages, which is more popular in the Indian subcontinent. So we are in a position in which so many languages are or do stay with us. And every moment this act or the process of translation goes on with us. So we cannot say that we have disengaged with translation. Willy-nilly, consciously or unconsciously, you are a translator essentially, if you are living in this kind of a scenario. So this happened with me as well, that even while I'm presumptuous in speaking in the first person, I presume that this is what I'm going to do. So I all the time think that am I in a position? Am I in a position? Can I even place myself in a position to engage with two languages because I speak two or maybe three, or engage with more than two languages? So how do I do that? So it was an experience of frequent failures and occasional successes. But this made me very happy in the very beginning. That occasional success, one or two, one good translation, or maybe a couple of shares, if you were looking at a ghazal or a short poem, because one couldn't think of taking up a long poem. Because let me tell you first that I did not or haven't been able to try my hand or lay my hands upon prose text or fiction. I have been a translator of poetry throughout, right from the beginning, because that is what I feel closer to. That is what I have taught all my life as a teacher in the university. So this is what I have been teaching. So poetry came to me rather naturally, and that was the reason why I started writing poetry in my own language, mother tongue Urdu, and also in English. Of course, in the very beginning, it started like this when I was a graduation student, as I told you. So these were the questions which I kept on attempting, trying to find answers for myself, the experience of remembering one's frequent failings and how one's successes succeeded at times, and how the text and the translator were trying to travel together. How I was in a position to find, to pinpoint, to locate, and to put my finger at a particular text and see that this is what I have written, and this is what I might probably write if I were to translate it into some other language. Now, suppose if I am writing a Urdu poem, and I do not translate my own. But if I'm reading an Urdu poem by someone else, it seems as if I'm translating myself. So suppose if I'm I'm translating a poem by Akhtarul Iman, a very important modern poet. So it appeared to me as if Akhrul Iman was me, and I was trying to look at Akhrul Iman as myself. So even though it was not the poem by me, but Akhrul Iman became by proxy me, and therefore I was trying to speak through his voice. So this was just an example. So it developed, started coming to me like that. You see that translating poetry appears impossible to many people. And I remember there was a whole session in Sahitya Academy many years ago, and the title was is poetry translatable? Can one ever think of translating poetry?" Very eminent people took part there. Very eminent poets were there, poet translators were there. I also happened to be a part of the discussion. And howsoever difficult, but poetry has to be translated. In one of the posts that I saw today, someone said that it's very difficult or almost impossible to translate. But I answered saying that the world would grow poorer by half if one didn't translate, especially poetry. So you cannot just leave it because poetry is impossible to translate. My take is that it is possible and it is worth doing. Therefore, I engaged myself with all these issues that I have been briefly touching upon. For doing this, I need to go back in time first to my the beginnings, that is to say, my graduation days and how I came to do sometimes in Urdu and sometimes in English. Those poems are still with me, but I do not look at them with great value and considering because at a particular stage in my life, I thought that these were not very important ones. Therefore, these may not be preserved, but yet they are there, and I can I go back and I look at them sometimes and think that these were the poems or these were the lines that I composed when I was a student, and some of them make sense to me even today, but most of them don't because with the passage of time, one read more, one experienced more, one developed one's own linguistic habits, one tried to emulate one a certain kind of a language or develop a certain kind of a language for oneself. So I tried to look at translator in a very to a translation in a very natural fashion. It came very naturally to me. I first, in the beginning, I was trying to find equivalents of one word for the other. So what would be the equivalent of this word in the English language or in the Urdu language if it was an English word? So what would be the equivalents? So it began with finding equivalents first. And in finding equivalent for the words, I landed ultimately finding equivalents for a sentence. So if this particular line in a poem is this, so how could this be probably translated into the Urdu language or into the English language? So it started with word. It was a fine play. It was fun for me. So I started with word, and then after that I went to the line. And later I found that this was adolescent exercise. Some very say juvenile texts I chose at that point of time. Some very unusual phrases I chose to translate for the fun of it, and to be able to understand how this could possibly be done. Then I even went to the film songs because one was a used to go to watch movies when I was a student in the university. Lots of us used to go, and so there's some songs which were very popular and which we used to hum. So one day it appeared to me, why can't I translate this particular line or this song, two, three, four lines or one particular stanza? So it began as a fun. But this one ultimately became a serious exercise with me. It became a serious engagement, a preoccupation with me, and therefore I started traveling with that habit and took on many routes. And finally, I went to from one place to another. So it was no longer trying to do something in fun or in a very jovial manner, but something more important, more complex. So from the word to the line, then I ultimately landed up finally. I could say finally because this continues even today, that I found that there was a word and this word also transferred itself into a simile. So how do you do this? Then I thought that this simile also transfers itself into a metaphor. So how do you do this? And then I found that this metaphor also transfers itself into a symbol. So how do you do this? And then finally, I thought that this symbol also transfers itself into a myth. So how do you do this? These were the questions which started engaging my attention. This was at a later stage in my life, and I thought that probably these are the ways of developing one's own craft of translation, if I were to use the word craft within quotes. So these questions became important for me. No longer the line was important, but what the line contained, a metaphor or a symbol or a myth, these were the issues that I tried to engage with. So I started engaging with these, with the myths, with the archetypes, and I was naturally drawn towards the play of words and the play of wits. So the words and the wits, This was the kind of a game that I started playing and learning my own language as well as the English language, vice versa, learning my English language as well as my Urdu. It should not be taken that if you are a Bangla speaking person or if I am a Urdu speaking person, I know my language. It's a presupposition. It's a misnomer. We need to know our mother tongues to which we are born. We need to train ourselves in the language to which we are born. So you need to know your Bangla. I need to know my Urdu, and then only maybe in a position I can engage with that language, because language plays tricks with the speakers. Even if you are born to that language, you are a native speaker of that particular language. So these questions started looming large over me. So when I was translating, I was learning two languages particularly, more especially. That is, in translating from English to Urdu, I was learning my Urdu. And also I was learning my English when I was doing the vice versa. So it was a process of learning language as well, apart from trying to engage with a simile or a metaphor or a symbol or a myth or an archetype. So these were the questions that started coming to me. Then I came to Ghalib. Everyone comes to Ghalib. Everyone begins with Ghalib anyway. He's such an influence, such an important influence that everyone goes to Ghalib very naturally. So as a student, I went to Ghalib and I did six shades. I won't say couplets because couplet is different from shades. So six shades, you see. Now, when I did this, I was very happy about it. That I have tried my hand on Ghalib, and Ghalib is such a major poet, and probably I have been able to do it. Then I showed it to someone, to some of my senior teachers and those who were poets and those who knew English better. So I thought that, and they encouraged me. They said, "Well, this is worth doing, and you have done a bit. Don't worry. You will learn more, and you will do better." Unfortunately, I don't have those drafts with me now, but I began with Khalid that way. More serious work has started coming like that. But still, that was my formative year when I started doing that. That was the point of time when a professor of English, whom I met and said that the failed poets are good translators. Now, this sentence is stuck to my mind. Those who fail as a poet usually succeed as a translator. Now, when I thought about it, I thought that this was something, a very interesting sentence it was for me, and a very interesting experience. So I was trying my hand on Urdu poetry and also on English poetry. And at a particular point of time, after doing my post graduation and after joining the university service, I stopped writing poetry because I felt Urdu poetry because I felt that I was not doing anything remarkable. Well, everyone is writing poetry like that, the kind of poetry that I'm writing. No, those everyone is writing. So why should I should continue and write this kind of poetry for the reason that I'm not making any particular kind of a contribution. So I stopped writing for a quite long time. But the sentence stayed with me that one who fails as a poet generally succeeds as a translator. And again, the sentences started coming back to me. And it kept on coming to me from time to time. And I was not at all drawn far away from poetry, writing my poetry. So in between, my poems started coming in Urdu language. So I was traveling in both the directions, writing as also trying to translate that writing. That was also the time when I started reading the poets, especially the American poets, in which I was very interested, apart from the British one, which I taught. So these American poets engaged my attention, and I especially the modern poets, starting from Frost and a little before Frost. So this continued in a way. So in too many directions I was moving, trying to explore myself: Urdu, English, British poetry, American poetry, sometimes prose, but not so much. So this was the way I started to think of myself as a failed poet and maybe a successful translator at later point of time. But I later realized that one who writes poems doesn't really ever die. One might go slow writing poems, but one doesn't really die. One doesn't really divorce. One doesn't really move away. So much later in my life, it swarmed back to me. I started writing my poems in English, and I started writing poems in Urdu, and it continued in this manner. You have just shown my book, Earthenware. These poems were there in my mind. They were cooking up in my mind for a very long time. 60 poems are there, and these are the poems. 30 of these poems are my childhood experiences. 30 of the other poems, this is called Soil. That section is called Soil. And then the 30 poems, the second section, which is called Rock. And there you have the present life, the life that I have led, the disappointments, the despairs, etc., of the kind of life that we lead and the times in which we are. So 60 poems representing two phases of my life. These are very autobiographical poems. So not that I stopped writing my poem, it continued with me, but in fits and starts. And finally, I settled down both as a poet and as a translator. Although I published my Earthenware much later in my life, only 3 years ago it was published, although these poems have stayed with me. I published my Urdu poetry, of course, when I was in the 70s, 80s, I did publish, and then after that there is a break, and then it has come back to me again. So these were the ways I was trying to develop both as a translator and a poet, and vice versa as a poet and a translator, working in two languages simultaneously and trying to develop my affair, I would say, with the two languages that I was trying to engage with as an academic, as a student, as a native speaker, or one who was trying to learn a language, either myself my own language or the language of the other, the mother tongue or the other tongue. So that is how I started doing. I had to make my choices thereafter because it became a serious affair. So when you are in love at point of a time, it becomes a very serious affair. You can't disengage with that. So in the beginnings, you might be playful, but after that, responsibilities grow upon you. So the responsibilities grew upon me. I thought that Urdu poetry was more often read with great admiration, and because it was the poetry of rare delights and strange mysteries, and therefore Urdu poetry is therefore great. This is total misconception. Urdu poetry has so much to offer. Generally, people think that Urdu poetry is all about beauty and zulf and rukhsar and romance and all, which is a misnomer. That is not the case. Urdu poetry has so much to give. For example, the mystical poetry of Urdu, if you read of Khaja Mir Dar or come to Mir or come to any of these poets, it's not just romance of life, romance in the sense of romantic love, but it's something else. The Urdu poet usually talks of ishq haqiqi and ishq majazi. That is the sensual and of course the spiritual. So these are, and it's very difficult to distinguish the line and very difficult to distinguish the two kinds because sometimes one joins the other and the borders and the boundaries are all broken. So one love leads to another kind of a love, the physical leads to the spiritual. So these were the questions that started looming large upon my mind, and I started engaging with them so that I could understand how to deal with this kind of a love in my poetry. So I wanted to revert this notion that Urdu poetry is all about romance. Urdu poetry is all about love. Urdu poetry is all about the beauty of the beloved, the romantic ideal. That was the kind of a situation that I wanted to revert, and therefore it became a serious engagement for me. The age to which I came, the age to which I came was the modern age, which interested me more in the beginning. So I started thinking of these poets in the beginning, and I thought that uh, I would engage with the poets after the 30s, that from the progressive rises movement onwards, 1930s onwards. So I tried to find new forms and expressions that these poets were trying to engage with. I tried to find the poetics that these poets were trying to follow. I tried to find the genre, and the genre that appealed to me in the beginning was Nazm, that is the regular poem, not the ghazal, because ghazal I tried my hand in the beginning with Ghalib, and later on I moved on to something different, something. So this is how I was trying to find myself. So ghazal later, but Nazm engaged my attention, and to Nazm I went first. Therefore, I had started translating the modern poets, and I began at the 30s, and I published therefore a collection of my Nazm in English translation about 30 years ago, known as Fire and the Rose. It did very well. It received good reviews. It became part of the syllabi in many universities wherever they were teaching other literatures of the Indian subcontinent. So that is how it became. I tried to negotiate with that. I could suffer on that account because of my own incompetence, and therefore I recovered from that. These were the things. So drafts after drafts after drafts started coming. One of the major things that I did, and everyone does, not only me, everyone does, and everyone must do, is to revise and to look at the draft again and again. There is no final draft in translation. Your translation remains a draft ultimately, even at the end. There comes a life and you just get out of it. This far, no further. I can't improve any further upon this, and therefore you don't go further, and you stop there. So there comes a moment. But unfortunately, when you look at your own works, which is published, and you look at it a year later or 2 years later, you feel bad that I could have rendered this line like this, not like this, not like that. So it is always a process of revision. It never comes to an end. That is my personal experience that I'm saying. So many of the things which I published, I later found that I could have probably done it far better than I have done. Therefore, you close the book. You don't like to read that book any further because you feel bad about what you did. So that is a way of learning. So a translator basically is a student who learns, and all his or her life one keeps on learning this translation. It never comes to an end. Extremely, extremely demanding kind of a thing. It's a very protracted exercise. It does not come to an end that very easily. It's a very protracted time taking. Consultations with oneself, consultation with the people who might be the readers, consultation with the poet with whom you have worked or you haven't worked but looked at the text. So there are many levels of dialogue that you develop, and I developed that dialogue. Sometimes with the poet whom I was translating, first with myself, then some colleague or a friend mostly I went to my students, and I would advise, go to students for the work that you have done. They are the best judges. They are the best critics. Some people have not agreed with me ever in my life. Oh, a student say, kya puchna hai? Why ask your student? Because we teach them. Well, one must go to them because they come with very fresh ideas. The ideas that we don't, it doesn't strike to us, but they bring those ideas. And I have learned a lot by engaging with them, and therefore have gone back to them. So my colleagues, my friends, my students, and the poets and others. So there's a series of dialogues that been develops in the process of writing. So after Fire in the Rose, I thought that I would let me move forward and see what it really works, how it really works for me. It appeared to me that if I was translating Urdu poetry into English, what was I doing? Was I transferring a thought only? Or was I transferring an image which was very particular to a language or a culture, or some kind of a metaphor or a symbol, or was it something different? I came to the conclusion that it was not that. If you are translating Urdu poetry, and one might differ, anyone may differ with me, I ultimately came to realize that I was trying to translate the rhythm that the word, that the language carried. And the rhythm, the basic rhythm, the internal music that particular poem carried for me or meant for me. So ultimately, I found that the rhythm or the music or the poem as a musical unit started appealing to me. And I thought if I'm in a position to make this available to my English reader with the sense and the sound as well, then it makes better sense. So I started concluding, therefore, that it was a way of trying to imitate the rhythm or the music or the rhyme or the refrain that an Urdu text carries. And as far as I can transfer in a language which is not mine and that language is someone else's, so he needs also to get a shock of surprise. That, well, this is it. This is how Urdu poetry works. Well, many people may not agree with this idea that for example, I tried to imitate the rhythm or the music or the apart from the content, the sound, the poem in the ear, as you say, the poem in the eye. Apart from the poem in the eye, there is a whole thesis about this, a whole book about this. A poem in the eye. How do you look at a poem on a page? How do you listen to that poem? So I thought that the act of translating Urdu poetry into English was trying to transfer an ear, a poem to the ear. Apart from transferring a text which had a certain form, which was a hieroglyph kind of a thing. So I was transferring that, no doubt, without making any changes. But I was also transferring the sound, the rhythm, the semblance of the sound, you could say. Now, the question is how to do that in the English language, because English language is not all the time prone to kind of a language. So I will come to that when I will talk of ghazal. So this is what I started doing, and I started finding a way of negotiating with these texts for myself. Then I thought that there were overall expression that was important for me. That overall expression was important for me to catch hold of and to engage myself with and to take the readers. I will give you two examples so that we can have an idea of what I was doing. And this is one of the earliest examples which I have brought before you. There is a very famous, I'm going to give this example to help you understand what rhythm I'm trying to look at. What is the idea of the rhythm that I have in my mind, or the musicality of a line that I have in my mind, and how I try to imitate that in the Urdu language. So I'm reading two very small extracts from two translations, from English to Urdu and the other from Urdu to English, so that you can get this idea that what I really mean by that. It's a very famous poem by Robert Frost, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. We all have read, we all have taught this poem, so there's no need to talk about that poem. The last lines are, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Now, this is all these lines are there. These 4 lines we have all heard about, we have taught, read, etc. These are very fascinating lines. So I thought that let me do it. And the Urdu version which I came up with is the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. ये जंगल क्या सुहाना, कितना पुरस्कार, कितना बेकरार है. Now you will find there are 3 words I have injected here. 3 words. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. Lovely, dark and deep. And I have also brought the equivalents here. ये जंगल क्या सुहाना, कितना पुरस्कार, कितना बेकरार है, मगर उस पार के वादे मुझे वापस बुलाते हैं. मगर उस पार के वादे मुझे वापस बुलाते हैं. मैं थक कर लंबी गहरी नींद सो जाऊं, मुझे उस नींद से पहले अभी कुछ दूर जाना है. सफर के मील से रिश्ता निभाना है, अभी कुछ दूर जाना है. Now you would see that there is a certain musicality in Frost poem, and I was trying to do this here in the Urdu language because Urdu ear was prone to this, and I thought that this will work. And when this was published in a journal and when it was presented also in a discussion group, I got words of appreciation because they thought that I was in a position to transfer. This is what I had done, thought of doing, and they also identified that you have been able to transfer the rhythm, the feel, the ear, the words as they sound to me. So they liked it anyway. But that was my take, that let me translate not only the idea, but the whole atmosphere that this poem carries about a straw, about stopping by wood. So you have that whole idea about the whole atmosphere, the evening and the fall and the snowfall and the horse and the neighing and the tumbling of the bell, etc. So the whole thing I tried to bring into the poem, and but musicality was my main concern, which I tried to do. I will give you another example. This is by Kafi Azmi. Kafi Azmi, you know, is a progressive poet, an important poet, and this is a poem which was also used by him. He gave it to a film. I think it was Haqiqat in which he gave this, and it is. I like this poem for the reason that it has a certain crescendo and descendo. The ideas go up like this and it's down, and then you come to the level. You come to the. There is a drama behind it. There is a music behind it. There is a condition behind it. There are 2 characters behind it, and it's also a film song. So let's forget about the film song, but it's a love poem, and it's a wonderful. So I'm just trying to read those lines. I'm sure you are going to understand. मैं ये सोच कर उसके दर से उठा था. मैं ये सोच कर उसके दर से उठा था कि वो रोक लेगी, मना लेगी मुझको. मगर उसने रोका, न मुझको बिठाया, न दामन ही पकड़ा, न वापस बुलाया. मैं आहिस्ता आहिस्ता, I hope I remember the poem like this, मैं आहिस्ता आहिस्ता बढ़ता ही आया, यहाँ तक कि उससे जुदा हो गया मैं. Let me read it again. मैं ये सोच कर उसके दर से उठा था कि वो रोक लेगी, मना लेगी मुझको. Just follow me. कदम ऐसे अंदाज से उठ रहे थे कि आवाज देके बुला लेगी मुझको. I have forgotten this. हवाओं में लहराता आता था दामन, के दामन पकड़कर बिठा लेगी मुझको. You look at the rhythm. के दामन पकड़कर बिठा लेगी मुझको. मगर उसने रोका. Now you see crescendo, now descendo. So this is what I expected. Now this didn't happen. So descendo. मगर उसने रोका, न मुझको मनाया, न आवाज ही दी, न वापस बुलाया, न दामन ही पकड़ा, न मुझको बिठाया. मैं आहिस्ता आहिस्ता बढ़ता ही आया, यहाँ तक के उससे जुदा हो गया. Expectation not met, therefore I separated. She didn't stop me. She didn't ask me to stay back and be with her. Therefore I separated from her. I thought that let me try and imitate. I'm using the word imitate within quotes. The condition, the experience, the language, the rhythm, and the whole mood of the poem. Listen to my English rendition. I left her door and thought as though she would call me back and not let me go. My heavy steps so paced as though she would call me back, not let me go. My heavy steps so paced as though she would call me back, not let me go. The wind so billowed through as though she would hold my guard, not let me go. She neither now the descent. Crescendo descent. Now you see, she neither stopped, nor wished I stay, nor gave a call, nor held my way, nor clenched my gob, nor had any say. I kept on faring forward slowly till I separated from her. Separated, I wrote it like this: S-E dash P-E dash R-A dash T-E-D-L-Y, like this. Separated, because this whole idea of separation is a spread over, it's a process. So separation is not just one word, it's a process. It has happened in a certain way, it has taken time, the separation has taken time to happen. So I just put dashes. This was something innovation. This was not there in Kafi's poem. He did not put dash between his judai. Juda ho gaya main. I separated from her. But I did this and on purpose. So I put this dashes in between separated. And there are four dots there, dashes there. So I wanted to create that kind of a condition, what separation means, that it takes time and very painfully it happens. So it doesn't happen separation. So separation takes time. So these were two very simple examples. I thought that I'll give it to you, bring to you, so that you can understand. So I wish to create a condition in my poem through sound, and in translation I wanted to do that. And in that process, I was trying to write my English poem, and also I was trying to conceive my Urdu poem simultaneously, and how both the things went together. My job was to make a representation of an experience that was not mine, but in an idiom that was experience that was mine, but in an idiom that was not mine. I must have reminded you of Raja Rao's foreword to Kantapura, where he says that I have to write about something, an experience which is mine, but in a language which is not mine. And that is the idea, that is the challenge before a writer who doesn't speak English. And he was writing in the context of the Indian writers, saying that the experience is mine, but the language in which I want to write, that is in the English language, this novel Kantapura, or any novel that you write, or any poem that you write. So the language is not yours, but you have to say your say. So how do you say your say? So this is a way of negotiating with language, with the feel of language, with the fiber, the fabric, the language, how you touch this language, how you make sense out of this language, how you carry forward the idea that this language carries with you. So this is what I was trying basically to do. These were some of my early examples. Now I will just finish. Before that, before I finish, I'll come to two books. That is, one is this recently published, look, 2 years ago. This is an anthology of ghazals, which you have, Professor Mashood, you have just shown that Hazaro Khwahishein Aisi, the wonderful world of Urdu ghazals. Now, this is, so by this time, what I did, that I came out of the poem that is the regular poem, the Nazm, and I thought that let me try my hand on the ghazal form. Now, one thought all the time, if is it possible to do, because there is nothing like ghazal in the English tradition. Ghazal is not at all known. No one knows about it. Only recently it started, and I would say 1979 onwards, after the Ghalib centenary year, that people started doing this, because when Ejaz Ahmad in an American university, who taught then at that point of time there, and Ghalib centenary year 1979, I remember. So that was the time when it was all over the world, people were talking about it. So while Ejaz Ahmad asked many people that, have you heard of this poet called Ghalib? And people said, no, who was this? And he introduced, and then said, well, this is what he has done, and this is a ghazal, would you translate it? And they did. Seven, 8 important poets of America he had invited, and none of them could do Ghalib at all. They were far, far, far away from Ghalib, because they didn't know this form at all. It was a very different, alien form. Some of the very important American poets at that point of time, like for example, Adrienne Rich was there. And she was so enamored by this form that she said that I will try my hand. And she started writing her ghazals feverishly after that. And successfully, most of them without understanding this form. So this engaged my attention. I thought, let me try my hand on the ghazal. So I started. Then I thought that I worked earlier when I was doing my poems for Fire and the Rose. I was reading on the modern poets only. So why don't I go back to the past, and then I read it this whole anthology. So this time, the book that we have referred to, which is forthcoming, Garden of All Senses. This is an anthology of ghazals, and what I have done there, that I have gone back to the first poets who wrote in the Urdu language. That is from Quli Qutub Shah, late 16th century Deccan. And from there, I have traced the whole journey. So later I learned from a line, you remember I'm going back, from a line, I went to an image or to a metaphor, and then to the whole areas of experience that he has started engaging with. So how does a poem make sense to me? How can I transfer to choosing a poet, to choosing a time frame, choosing 1930s and then onwards? Then I thought, let me go back and create a whole. So the job of a translator, then I decided and then I thought for myself, is not just to select pieces at random. He has or she has to create a canvas. Therefore, he or she in a position to pass on to his readers a whole tradition. Therefore, I thought that let me go back to Quli Qutb Shah, and from there I should trace the whole, the origin and the development of Urdu Nazm. And this is what I did. The book which is forthcoming. But before, but before this book will come now, but I published before that this book known as Zaru Khwahishi, The Wonderful World of. I did the same thing there also. So I was trying to pass over a whole tradition and how I was trying to engage. So this book also starts from Quli Qutb Shah, that is late 16th century Deccan. And then it comes to a 17th century poet, Walid Haqqani. I'm just naming you the major ones. Then it comes to me, the 18th century major poet, and then you come to the 19th century Ghalib. There are 65 poets. So what I was trying to do here, I was not just trying to translate a ghazal, a form. I was also trying to translate a literary tradition from one language into another. Then I was trying to develop a trajectory for the English reader, to pass on a trajectory for the English reader who would be in a position to understand how this whole process is, how this whole journey takes place. Supplementing is a very important part of translation. We think that we translate a text and the job is over. No, it's not over. You need to supplement. You need to read an introduction, write an introduction. Therefore, I did that. You need to introduce that age. Therefore, I did that. You need to introduce the poet. Therefore, I did that. And then finally, you introduce the poet, the ghazal. This is what I did, and came from there, starting from 16th century, I came down to the 20th century, late 20th century. So it covers a journey, a whole trajectory of 500 years from the 16th century, late 16th century to early 21st century or 20th century, end of it. So my journey, my whole trajectory, my methodology was not to look at a text in fragments for words, but for images, metaphors, as I said earlier, and symbols, then to the form, and then to the genre, and then to the age, and then to the tradition, then to the literary history, and then to pass it on to a reader who would like to read this whole process, know this whole trajectory, because a translator is not only given to translate a particular text and get rid of it. No, he cannot. A translator is a very responsible, has to be as responsible as the author himself or herself. The author does one job, the translator does another job. He develops a different kind of a dialogue. So for me, it was essentially an act of translating at the same time of understanding myself, my text, my language, and I was learning two languages simultaneously. Along with this, I was also doing the translations of poets from English to Urdu. One I have just given you, but then I did a whole lot of American poets, starting from Frost, a little before Frost. So the modernist tradition again I went to. I didn't go back to the past tradition. And there I lay my hands upon the major, because I wanted that the Urdu reader should also know about how the American poets, or how the English, many of them are English poets, you know that because they traveled. And so this kind of transcultural and this locational variations are there, of course, in that poetry. The beginnings of the modernism, all those things are reflected. So I thought that let the Urdu reader also to be able to conceive his poem, look at how Frost onwards, how poetry was taking shape somewhere else. So I tried to do it to enrich the Urdu sensibility. And therefore I did it, and that is yet to be published. I hope it will come someday soon, because the book is there. And one needs to have the courage to publish, of course. When I always think that, well, publishing is not that something that you do and you just run after a publisher and get it done, because after that you are much more responsible and you have to be answerable to what you have done or not done. So I think that will probably. So my whole engagement with translation has been with poetry, number one. Then starting from word to the larger picture of passing a tradition to another reader. And in the process to know my language and to be able to know another language. When I was doing this ghazal, and there I'm going to finish because I think there should be some time for interaction also, because there are many people who would like to talk. When I was doing ghazals, I thought that there are two lines only in a ghazal. दो मिसरे हैं उसके अंदर, only two misras, and these two misras make a share. Now the whole idea of the share is alien to the English reader. The whole idea of the rhythm and the refrain is alien to the English reader, because the ghazal has a certain structure. It has a certain qafiya, has a certain radif. It has to follow that. There is a meter. There is a fixed line movement. There is a say. There are syllables, counted numbers. So when I started my translating my ghazals, what I did, I counted my syllables in translation. How many syllables I have used in this particular line? And I thought that let my syllables be uniform in number. I'm sharing what I did. This is my own way of doing it. I'm sharing the secret with you. So what is the number of syllables that my line contains if I'm trying to translate one ghazal or one share from English, from Urdu to English? Then I thought, what is the length of my word? If it is a short word of 5 syllables, then let it be 5, 6 words. Otherwise, there is a gap. The rhythm gets disturbed. So all the words have the same volume and the same size. So one was that the count of the syllables, then the words of the similar length, similar size, similar volume, and then put them, both the lines, in the same frame and see towards the end whether there is a refrain and a rhyme possible. Because Urdu ghazal has a refrain, has a rhyme and a refrain. Without that, it can't be. I tried to imitate that. And in many cases, I did succeed, as far as I can understand. I did succeed in the sense that I found a suitable qafiya for that, a suitable radif for that. That is, a rhyme was there and a refrain was there. But in many cases, I couldn't. But then, in that case, what I did, I tried to create some kind of a semblance of sound, especially towards the last word that I was using, or the last two phrases that I was using. And I was going to repeat it one after another. So every line had that. So the echo, that sense of sound, that sense and the sound all wedded together, that came to me. So this is how I started. But then the process didn't. It was a very protracted process. It took very long, many revisions I took. And it took many years. Sounds ridiculous. Took 10 years to do that. Publisher took another many years to do that, because they thought that this will not work maybe. But when they published, they also felt happy that this has done pretty well and it got good reviews. I'm not just trying to put myself in that position to say that I've done a good work. I'm just trying to say that that is how I try to develop my own skills, if at all I have done or learned any kind of skills at translating the ghazal or the nazm. So basically, I try to engage with something very frivolous, something very trivial kind of text, even a film song, as I said. And then I went deeper into deeper. So it's a kind of a love affair, to put it very metaphorically, and it is it grows upon you with the passage of time. You commit yourself to that beloved, and you make yourself say, I'm not saying available, but you make yourself for her, and she comes to you closer, and you just embrace, and that's how you go together, and then you are inseparable. Most of us among the audiences, I'm sure, are translating, but translation is not something which you have done and learned and said it is done. It's never done. As I said, it's always an abundant exercise. Many times it has been said that you keep on doing it and you keep on learning and you just keep on engaging with yourself. So this process of engagement is never over. But if you happen to be a poet, maybe you are far better equipped to do it. I might sound very, say, simpleton saying that if you are a poet, you will do a better work. But certainly you know the nature of the word, the feel of the word, what kind of a word this is that I'm touching, and whether this word has an equivalent in the target language that I have, if I'm speaking a very technical language. That so the target and the source text have to join hands together. Some people say, some theoreticians are of the view that a translation must read like a translation. It shouldn't read as good, as rhythmical, as beautiful. Beautiful is a very as a, is not the right kind of critical word to use, but as made up, something very prepared, something very conceived in an artificial manner, even at the same time. So you try to do this and try to engage basically with a text. So you are creating a text, developing a dialogue, entering into another culture, and also taking another culture into your fold, and growing far more in a far more complex manner that one lives. in a certain language or a culture. My opinion has always been, which I have taught in the class and said, that we are the best site in the world to translate and to study literature comparatively. There are no other sites in the world. There are so many languages we need to. Other languages are one language culture. We are multilingual. I'm just repeating something which is very, very common. Everyone says we are a multilingual and multicultural country, the whole continent, subcontinent that I'm. But this has a great sense. This is the location where you can translate the best. This is the location where you can study literature comparatively the best. Compare. The only thing is that we need to develop these skills to know ourselves as a reader, as a translator, and as a creator of a text in a language which you speak and in language which you are trying to reach through. Professor Ashur Hussain, I think I have taken more time. I must leave some time for interaction. So let me finish there, and I would be happy if there are any questions. More importantly, any observations which I might learn from. I'll be very happy listening to you all. I can see Professor Fakhrul Alam's name here, and he has typed something. I couldn't read that. It has disappeared. Anyway, thank you very much, Mashroor, for this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this fascinating presentation. Yes, I also saw a number of scholars here, so the floor is open for questions. Before we take questions which we have already had in our chat boxes, I would like to request if the scholars here, I would see Professor Farkul Alam, Professor Chandra Mohan. So yes, so if you would like to make any comment or any observation on anything, we'd be happy to have you.
Very happy to have these people around.
Can I begin?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Fakhrul.
Yes, sir.
Well, I typed and I thought I would exit for dinner, but I decided to stay back and talk to you. Wonderful listening to you. And, you know, I was, as I said, as I wrote, I was enthralled. And I envy your ability to translate it from both languages. And your experience, you know, the way you put it was also fascinating. I mean, I share a great deal because I do translate a lot also.
Yes,
And
I know. Yes, I know.
I share your experience, even though I can't
Yes.
translate both languages.
Yes.
I dream of translating into Bangla, and you know,
Yes.
one of these days I'll do that too. But it was a learning experience. It was very nice.
I'm very humbled. Very humbled. I'm very humbled.
And you know, so involved about you know, you said a lot about craftsmanship also, which I thought was fascinating. Thank you very
Fakhrul,
much.
yeah, Fakhrul, do you recognize this cup that I hold in my hand?
And do you recognize this book?
This is the cup that you gave me when I visited your university, East West University. So I thought I must take this cup out today, and I must drink my water from here.
And this is what I took out. This is what I took out early today. I'll say
Yeah.
goodbye. Okay.
I have
Goodbye.
preserved it. Thank you very much for your kind words, and I'm really beholden to you. I'm really thankful to you for your kind words, and you have been such a good translator. And especially the book that you gave me when I visited your university. It's such a thick book of must have taken a lifetime to translate that.
And thank you, Mashur, for this you know, opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your participation.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So maybe here, Professor Chandra Mohan. Professor Chandra Mohan, do you hear us? Okay, he might be available.
Chandra Mohan.
He might be available soon. Okay. Professor Ansuman, we have a number of questions.
Yes, please.
Yes. So you can also see them. Let me start with one from the question answer session. Yes. It is Rukaiya Sharkar Paki, student from Jahangirnagar University. Okay. He said, greetings. I have a little query mentioning one of the best quotes of Robert Frost regarding translation of poetry, that poetry is what gets lost in translation. So,
yes, I very well know about this, and have heard about it many a time. And this is a very scary sentence. Very scary sentence. It scares you, and it takes you away from translation. It doesn't allow you to come near this. But as I said in the beginning, that if you don't translate, you are depriving yourself. And that event in the Sahit Academy, to which I referred to in the beginning, which brought together some of the very important poets and translators, and I was there as a part of it, where we discussed, is poetry translatable? So naturally, the answer was yes, it is. And if one has to, only if one has learnt it, and learning has no end, one has to go with it. It's a whole lifelong preoccupation that you have to be engaging with. So of course, the whole idea is, the challenge is, as you very rightly, something which is lost in translation. Or it is said that you are spreading the carpet other way around, the upside down, all sorts of things have come. And that the translator is a traitor, and all those things, that lots of things have been said about. This is something which is worth trying. And I personally feel very satisfied when I enter into this business and make a draft, a preliminary draft. And as I said, that you keep on revisiting that draft again and again and again and again, till the day you think that you have approximated, somehow you have come closer to what you wanted to say, or what the poet has wanted to say. Now the question is a very critical question here. You can never fix the intent, that this was the intent of the poet, because meaning is very questionable. After the theory, arrival of the theory, after the coming of theory, you all the time engage with the whole idea of meaning, because language is a very philosophical kind of a manifestation. You don't know how to use this language. So these are all issues of important consideration, which translated today is engaging. The poetics of translation is taking all these into consideration. So all said and done. For example, take Ghalib. There is so much of Ghalib done, but depends on how you look at it. Depends whether you really get some kind of develop some understanding of Ghalib, or you remain far, far away. Gives me an idea of referring to Umar Khayyam, for example. You read Umar Khayyam by Fitzgerald, it appeals to you greatly. But the question is it really the translation of Umar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, or something different from there? And if you know Persian, you will come to understand that it is not exactly what Khayyam was trying to do, but he had extracted from there the source, the basic, the soul of it, and put it into a different kind of a cultural context with a certain physiology in hand. And Fitzgerald has turned out something which is very different, which may not be Khayyam 100%, but it appeals to your imagination. And therefore, a new form, not a form, but a new kind of an experience. You're face to face with a new kind of experience. The whole genre has been revived with the Rubaiyat. So the whole idea of Rubai itself comes to the English reader. The English reader doesn't know what a Rubai is. It's a 4-line, but it's not just a 4-line composition. A sonnet is not a 14-line composition. There are technical variations in that. Similarly, Rubai is not just 4 lines. A Qata is also a 4-line composition, but there is a metrical pattern in that. So Fitzgerald maybe or may not have been aware of whether he was also trying to transfer Rubai into that language, to the target language, but he did that, because Rubai has a certain metrical beat, and you can't go away from that. If you do that, then you can't compose a Rubai. So it is difficult to do that. We are very right, but it is worth doing. Otherwise, you would be growing poorer, and the literary text would remain very, very constrained in a certain linguistic framework, and the readership, which is very limited. So it shouldn't be scary. One has to get out of that scare and to be able to engage with it. So a translator is a brave person. He has to be a brave person. He has to take risks.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Similar question, but more
Yes.
straightforward. It is from Manzar Imam from Jamia Millia Islamia.
Right.
The question is, does one have to be a poet to be a translator of poetry?
I have answered this already in a way. It has helped me. It has helped me, Manzar, very, very greatly. Because when you are a poet, and then you know the word, probably better than the one who is not a poet. I'm not saying that one who is not a poet doesn't know the word. I don't mean at all. But when you are a poet, you know the feel of the word. How one word connects with the other word to be able to create a misra or a line. So when you are translating, you are already half done with your exercise, in the sense that you know how to compose a line. And if you are a poet, then translating poetry is easier for you. This is purely my experience. And this is how I have learned doing my own job. And I said in the beginning, I may be wrong, but that is what has helped me. Now, there are many kinds of text that you engage with. You can engage with a text of history or a sociology or political science. That you don't have to be creative. It doesn't allow you to be creative. But in translation, you can take this creativity, not crossing any limits, so that the nature of the text, the target text, the source text doesn't change. What I'm trying to mean that you know the text in the source language, and if you happen to be a creative writer, your creativity comes to your rescue. And if you were here from the beginning, I referred to a sentence by one professor who told to me that one who fails as a poet generally succeeds as a translator. Now this sentence still stays in my memory, and it has often been say help in a way. It has often distracted me from work as well. So I think working in two languages and having the sensibility to know the word poetically and to feel the word, feeling the word is important. I might sound romantic feeling the word. It's a very romantic kind of an expression. By feeling, I mean that you have to have a peep into the word. You can touch the word, and thus the word should throw some kind of a wave into your mind and soul and body. This is all very romantic that I'm speaking about, but this really happens. This really happens. And you might be misled into thinking that I'm thinking of, or I'm talking about the creativity in translation. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that you have to be creative in translation, because that will be transcreation, and some might object to that. And some might say transcreation is not translation. So there are many examples of transcreation. Khayyam's is transcreation. So there are varieties of translations. So you have to decide what you actually want to do with your text and how you train yourself doing it, in spite of all the constraints of language and the nature of language in the two languages that you are engaging with.
Okay, sir. We have another question. It's a little bit a long question. It's from Dr. Maz bin Bilal from Jindal Global University.
Yes.
The question is addressing you, that you mentioned that you tried to create the Urdu poetics in English. I have lately begun to, you tried to create the Urdu poetics in English.
Poetics.
So it is important to create poetry in translation that reads well in the target language. And so it is important to try to create a poetics conducive to the target language. So what do you think?
Yes, I entirely agree with you, Mas. This is what I was trying to say also. Because when you transfer a text, I say the word transfer, or when you bring a text to a new reader, to a different kind of a reader, what do? You bring the whole literary culture with that. You expose your target reader not only to a particular text, a ghazal or a nazm, that is a poem, a regular poem, but you also carry with that text a whole literary culture that lies behind it, and with that a whole poetics that lies behind the creation of that poem. Now you, as you are yourself a poet, you write ghazals in English, you have published your book, and you know it very well how it happens, how you engage with your own text when you are creating for the first time as a creative writer, when you are writing your ghazal, and when you are writing a translation of Ghalib. So you must also be engaging with your own two selves. One, when you are working as a creative writer of a ghazal, as a poet of a ghazal, and second, when you are trying to translate a Ghalib or any other poet for that matter. So you have to, as a translator, as I and you both, and many like us, all the time try and understand what we are actually and how do we meet our responsibilities. I will use the word responsibility because there's a responsibility, a kind of an obligation to a text, a kind of obligation to a language and to a whole literary tradition. Because as I said in the beginning, that translation doesn't really mean picking a text and putting it into another language. You need to carry that literary culture, that ambience, that word, that whole something that composes, that creates that text, the whole feel of that text. Agha Shahid Ali is a very good example in this context to answer your question. He himself was trying and experimenting. When in the beginning he was trying to lay his hands on ghazal, he wrote in 4 or 5 lines. Then he learned that no, this is not the way. And he is the person who basically taught all the English poets, American poets, how to write a ghazal, and therefore engaged with that, and he developed that. So in the beginning, he was writing 4 lines. Then he came to translating, and finally he came to writing his own ghazals. And I think he's the most successful of the English poets to have written ghazals in the way ghazal should be written, technically proficient, because he was a technical virtuoso. Everyone know, all of us who teach in the class, he was a perfect technical virtuoso. And that virtuosity that he earned for himself, he passed on to a generation. So when he published his book, Ravishing Disunities, that was published by Wesleyan University Press, but unfortunately after he passed away. So it has so many ghazals put together, and he was the first teacher of ghazal who mattered most to the American poets. And that is how. So I personally look at like this. That starts with that experimental book Ghazals of Ghalib by Ejaz Ahmed. There he laid some kind of a tradition, started something that we should come and try to engage. Then when you come to August, so there is long gap of so many years, 4 decades are in between. So gradually we have learned it. I'll give you an example. There is a Canadian poet, Douglas Barber. I had a fellowship in a Canadian university, and there I happened to meet him in the English department where I was. Douglas Barber gave me a book to read, song book, and song book had couplets. And I told Douglas that this is very much akin to a form in Urdu that we have. It is known as ghazals. There we have shades, these couplets that you call, we have shades. And you come very close to that. So have you heard of what is a ghazal? So he said, no, I have no idea what it is. So I explained to him. It was a kind of a discovery for him. He discovered himself by when I told him that what you are writing comes very close to a particular tradition in Arabic, Persian, and finally in Urdu. So after that, and he is a performance poet, so he performs his poetry, and he was performing his ghazals also in many of the meetings that we had in the evenings or the party. He used to perform. Finally, because he was a performance poet and he used to take his breath in and out and then perform his poetry, so he composed 60 ghazals, and by that time he had written quite a few when I was there, and he called it Breath Takes, like this used to. And he sent me that book, Breath Takes. Now he tried to understand what this was. So he knew about Hafiz, he knew about Rumi, he knew about Ghalib, and he just went into it and delved deeper into it. So it's a very interesting process, Maz, in which we really try to transfer one literary culture, ambience, whole atmosphere. And this is a very fascinating job. It has been a fascinating job for me, and I'm sure it's the case with you as well. I hope I've been able to take your question. Probably this is what you intended.
So I'll give it one or two questions so that we can wrap it up. It is Abdullah Onindo. Are you there? Yes. Make a question short and. Yes, Abdullah Onindo.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your experience of translating poetry with us. I must thank you. Sir, I won't take much time, but your method reminded me, that's just a comment, reminded me of Rabindranath's concept of translation, that he said that translating is recreating. Sir, my question is that, you know, that Urdu poetry has certain sense of performativity. So as much as I understand from your words that you try to recreate the sound effects and the thought as much as possible. So was that in mind while translating Urdu poetry? Because, you know, when we lose Faiz Ahmed Faiz's rhythm, we lose a lot of his poetry, his poetic sense. So do you keep that in mind, the performative attitude of the Urdu poetic tradition?
Yes, thank you for this very interesting question. As far as the performative aspect of Urdu poetry is concerned, I consider every poetry is performative for that matter. No poetry is sterile that way, silent or sitting silently. Every word that you utter is performative in a way. You perform that word. A word is a noun, but also a verb. And in poetry, it breathes, and you can listen to that music of that word when it breathes into a poem. So that way, it is very, very performative. All poetry, for that matter, is. So when you talked, and I entirely agree with what you said, when you refer to Tagore, that creativity aspect, that takes you into a very blind alley, which means that you come very closer to so creatively create that translator that it no longer remains the original text which you had in the language, the source language, but it takes another form and you make so many revisions into it that it becomes your poem, and you are not echoing at all or you are not translating, but you are recreating something which was done by someone else, but it has acquired a new form into your hands, when you put it on the paper. So you don't write another poem. Bilal often talked about recreation, that is creative or transcreation. Transcreation is there. Many people have transcreated, but by transcreation you don't do entire justice to the text. In transcreation you take a greater part than the poet is there in the text. You become the major influencer. You will start influencing your source text. You will start revitalizing in a way. You try to re-Christian that poem once again to give it a new form and a new color and a new kind of an identity. So that transcreation is a very tricky ground. I personally don't believe in transcreation. To keep close to the text as far as possible. In fact, has to be possible. Because if it is not that, then you enter into the text. And a translator is not supposed to enter into the text on behalf of the poet. It should be the poet who you should be representing rather than you representing the poet through the poet. You shouldn't be representing through the poet. So you are right in performative aspect is all poetry, and Urdu poetry is, of course, it is very, very performative, and all poetry for that matter. And creativity has its own limit. You cannot cross that limit. Otherwise, it's a very blind alley. One is able to lost, one is liable to be lost.
Okay. I think it answered to a number of questions which have the similar theme, that how much creative or how much unique is translation. So do you want to add something more, or I think the answer is given?
I think I tried to sum it up in a way that creativity has its limits, and beyond that, it becomes your poem. And your poem is not the one that you are translating, because if that is the case, then you have to write your own poem. It happens, of course, it happens that you are inspired by a poet or any text, and you write another text of your own. This is also an impact of the translation, in the sense that you have read a poem, and you think that you are not translating, but you have in a way, because that whole idea has been with you. I give you my own example. I wrote a poem in Urdu. It's not because it's a long poem. And after doing this, I liked that poem a lot, but I have not published it ever. The reason being, I still have doubts if I have someone echoing here in this poem, because I somehow remember that I read something like that somewhere. And therefore, I didn't have the courage, because I might be then said, okay, you have got it from there and you have copied and you have just pasted. So it's not there. It has been there in my mind. So maybe that many of the lines which I must have read then refigured in a different manner. The title of that poem is Aaj ke din pe main ek harf shikayat likhunga. I will write a word of complaint about this day, about today. Now, this was an idea maybe in a poem which I read many, many years ago. But this whole idea gave me the whole poem, and it's about a poem spread over 2 pages. And I like that poem very much, because many of the images came to me in a flash, and I love that poem. I have not published it, and I will not publish it, because maybe I'm echoing someone. Someone might have stayed into my subconscious and it came out when I wrote it. So if it happens that you have a text in your mind, it echoes into your mind, and you write that text for you, considering that you have written, it happens. So that is also an impact of a text. The text stays with you for a long time. You never get rid of that text. And not as a translator, but as a creative writer. That is what you know as in comparative literature, you know as impact and response. How you get the impact and how you respond to that. So the east wind and the west wind, lots of discussions we have had in the CL interjections. So we talk about this. So that is how I think I would look at it.
If you take a cue from your last statement, is it that translation somehow enhances the anxiety of influence, or translation may also affect the poet translator in his or her style? I mean,
anxiety of influence, yes. Say there are certain poets which you like, whom you like a lot, and it happens that when you're writing your own poem, that poet knocks at your door again and again. That is what happened with that poem which I referred to just now. I might have,
yes.
might have been knocking. So that may be a possibility in translation as well. Quite possible. That possibility is very much there. And if you look at the comparative translation, comparatively look at, now for example, Faiz has been the most widely translated poet in English. Probably the best translator, most translations of Faiz will get, a number of translations are there. It was I wrote somewhere there's a Faiz translation industry going on. And you pick one poem, Bol ke lab azad hai tere. A dozen of people have done this. But you do a comparative study, you will find that these are all very different kinds of poems. Where does Faiz lie is for a critical reader, for the poet himself, for the translator himself to understand. Mujhse Pehli Si Mohabbat is a very famous poem, which is sung all the time. Or Hum Dekhenge, these days you are humming it every day, Hum Dekhenge. So this has been done by so many poets, so many translators. And all texts will differ from the other. So starting from J.V. Kirnan to now, 2 dozen translations are available, and one doesn't really know that there is an end to it, because the fast translation industry thrives. People have been at it, and again the same poems are being churned out in translation, and all translations differ from one another. So this is a very kind of a interesting engagement. But there is a word of caution at the end, I must say. People consider that translation is something very easy. And I often say that they say that you take a dictionary and you take a thesaurus, you sit on your table and you do the job. Such a simple way of looking at it. That is not at all the case. But at the same time, it is a very highly corrupting influence as well, because it is easy to do in that sense that if you write I'm talking to students and teachers here, that if you write a critical article, it takes your nights and days to study and to arrive at. But for translation, it becomes very easy that you take a text and sit and translate and churn and publish, and you get your points and you get your promotion. So many of us, the English teachers, be warned that translation is not the end of it. You have to write on the critical, on the translation poetics. Your job is not just to translate. You are the teachers who have to teach translation. Many of us, let me be frank, have got their names as translators, but they are faculty members, and they have done no service to translation studies because they thought this was easier, brought them name, brought them royalty, brought them books one after another. A teacher is not just that. A translation teacher has a greater role to play, greater responsibility to share and shoulder, rather than keep on translating and translating, because that way it is an easy job, but it's a very difficult job, because theory and the practice must go hand in hand. Anyway, anyone can translate, but that translator is not a poetician, is not an aesthete. He doesn't know about it. So we have also a responsibility of writing about it, so that we know what is the path that we are trading. You may disagree with me. It's all the way you look at it. Is Chandramohan around? Is he?
I'm not sure. We are seeing
Okay.
him, but he might. I mean, he might not be available. Hello,
Okay,
Professor
fine.
Chandramohan, are you there? Okay. It might happen that Mike
Okay,
might
okay.
not.
Sure.
Okay.
Doesn't
So
matter.
yes, there were some also questions, and of course, but I think we need to wrap it up
Yeah.
because it's more than.
An
I
hour
mean,
and a
we're
half. It's going to be 20 minutes.
another half an hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that the speech. I mean, excited number of questions and also observations. Uh, yes, we will keep discussing these things today and later because this series of webinar is going on. So I would like to thank Professor Anisa Rahman for this exciting and fascinating speech. The last words that he said, that not every translation is translation. And this is something, an apt ending when he started with saying that in a bilingual society or multilingual society, translation is rather an everyday business. So in that sense, broader sense, translation is something that we often do. More particularly, if you are in a bilingual society, multilingual society, translation is part of life. So if you communicate, you are a translator in that sense. With this premise, Professor Anisa Rahman focused on what it means to speak or communicate in two languages, to be a bilingual person, a bilingual scholar, a bilingual poet, and how to come to terms with bilingual experience. So what yet he has attempted in his life is innovating ways of translating, innovating his methodology of translation. For example, while translating an Urdu poet, he assumed the person of the poet. He becomes the poet. He preferred doing translation naturally. He started with words, then sentences, then discourses. For example, how to translate a metaphor or a symbol or a myth that became important and significant and also challenging, and particularly when the metaphor and the myth are intermingled. For him, also, translation is a process of learning the languages of both one's own and the other one's. He also tended to claim that a good poet can become a good translator and vice versa. And so Professor Anis Rahman ventured composing poems of his own and translating poems of others from, as he mentioned, from Qutub Shah Mirza Ghali, from ghazal to nazm, the different types of Urdu poetry. But Professor Rahman also argued that Urdu poetry is more than only romantic. So at the end of his talk, he focused on the challenge and the importance of transferring the music, the internal rhythm from the source language to the target language, from English to Urdu, from Urdu to English, for example. So again, thank you, Professor Anisur Rahman, for offering this exciting speech. I would also like to thank the Department of English, the chair of the department, who somehow failed to attend today because of her sickness, all the members of the seminar committee, precisely Professor Saniyat Sattar for taking all these technical things, and also Ibrahim Khondokar. And of course, thanks to all the participants for this exciting and vibrant discussion session. In the next week, we will have a speech from another scholar, and that will be on sexual or gender violence with focus on two South Asian writers, Arundhati Roy from India and Shaheen Akhtar from Bangladesh. So I would like to welcome you to, or invite you to that session. And again, thanks to Professor Anisur Rahman. And we will keep talking.
Yes, of course.
Yes, later, because many more questions were there. And so, and of course, I think later sometime we would like to hear from you, your own translation. That somehow today, because of the technical talk, we somehow did not have time, particularly that very, exciting book that Hazaro Kashi. And thanks, he gave this book as a gift to me when last year I was in Hyderabad. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Professor Mashur. I'm really beholden. I'm really thankful to everyone in the department. And please convey my regards to everyone there, students and the faculty. And I really look forward to interacting with you in future as well. Wish you all the very best and have good times. Stay safe. These are the difficult times that we are facing. All my best wishes and my thanks and regards to everyone here.
Thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for this nice session and your nice participation. Take care, stay safe and stay sane. Let's reach each other and let's enrich each other. Thank you.